There are nights that never really end. Not because the sun refuses to rise, but because something happens during those dark, quiet hours that burns itself so deeply into your memory that even years later, at random moments, in the middle of a normal afternoon, your body goes cold all over again. This is not fiction. These are real accounts from real people who showed up to ordinary jobs on ordinary nights and left as completely different people. People who will never look at a dark parking lot the same way. People who flinch every time a phone rings after midnight. People who know, in the deepest part of their gut, that something was out there watching them, waiting for the right moment to move. What you are about to hear happened to ordinary people in ordinary places, and that is exactly what makes it so terrifying. Because if it happened to them, it could happen to anyone. The first time I told this story out loud, the person listening to me went completely quiet. Not the quiet of disbelief, the quiet of someone who feels something cold settle over them and does not want to move in case it gets closer. I was 21 years old. It was the year 2017, and I was working part-time at a gas station a couple towns over from where I lived. It was never supposed to be a real job. It was just something I picked up while I figured out the direction I actually wanted my life to go. The plan was maybe 3 or 4 months, long enough to save up a little and buy myself some time. The job itself was not complicated. Rings up snacks, rings up cigarettes, takes cash for gas from the few people who still pay that way, smiles at strangers, watches the clock. That was the whole job. During the day, it was nothing. Slightly annoying, completely predictable. But the night shifts were a different world entirely. There is something about the inside of a gas station late at night that does something to the air around you. The lights inside the store are always turned up too bright, blasting fluorescent white across the tile floors and reflective surfaces. And then just past the glass walls, just past the gas pumps, the night outside is pure black. You are essentially sitting in a lit box in the middle of darkness, and everyone who exists outside that box can see you perfectly while you can barely see them at all. I thought about that more and more as the weeks passed. I got used to it, mostly, but I never got fully comfortable. That particular night, I was working the closing shift by myself. The store did not close until midnight, so I still had a few hours to burn. Nothing unusual had happened. A few customers here and there, some gas, some snacks, the usual background noise of the highway outside. Then, somewhere around 9 or 10 in the evening, the phone rang. Not my cell phone, the store phone, the landline mounted to the wall behind the register. I picked it up without a single thought. Why would I think twice? People called the store all the time. But the second the line connected, I knew something was different. The voice on the other end was low and slow and deliberately stretched out in a way that immediately set my teeth on edge. It sounded like someone who had watched too many horror films and decided to try out a villain voice. Like a bad impression of a killer, the kind of character you see in movies who breathes heavily into the phone and says something theatrical. I recognized it immediately. The same kind of exaggerated evil voice from those slasher films where someone calls a babysitter and asks if she has checked on the children. It was forced. It was clearly performed. And yet, despite all of that, despite every logical part of my brain telling me it was probably some idiot friend with too much time on their hands, something about that voice made the back of my neck prickle. The voice asked me if I was alone in the store. I stayed quiet for exactly 1 second. Then I went sarcastic. I said something like, "Yeah, you got me. Great job." And then I hung up. I immediately pulled out my phone and texted my friend group, asking which one of them was currently prank calling the gas station pretending to be a serial killer. I expected someone to immediately break and start laughing. Instead, they all came back confused. One said he had no idea what I was talking about. Another said he was at home. A third asked me what was going on. I assumed they were keeping the joke going, because that would have been the obvious move if you wanted to sell a prank. You deny everything until the other person believes it. I let it go. I figured they would drop it eventually. But 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. Same voice, same long, slow drawl. The caller wanted to know why I had hung up. I did the same thing I did the first time. Sarcastic response. Hung up. But this time, before I disconnected, the voice let out this quiet, almost pleased little laugh. Not a cackle, not over the top, just a soft, amused exhale. And then it said something that lodged itself under my skin and refused to come out. It said, I really should not be rude to people who know where I am. I hung up. But I did not feel the same way I had felt the first time. The first call I had brushed off as a stupid joke. This one felt different. The laugh was too natural. The line was too specific. I tried to tell myself it was still just my friends messing with me, and for a while, the steady stream of regular customers helped me stay distracted. People coming in for gas, for beer, for lottery tickets. Normal, human, completely uninteresting. I leaned on that normalcy as hard as I could, but every time the store got quiet, I found my eyes drifting back to the phone. It rang a third time at around 10:40 in the evening. I answered because I thought maybe if I confronted whoever it was directly, it would end. The voice asked me if the store always got this quiet so late at night. That was the moment something shifted inside me, because that was not a line from a prank. You do not ask about the ambiance of a store you are prank calling from your bedroom miles away. You ask something absurd. You say something to make yourself laugh. You do not calmly observe and comment on the quietness. I hung up without speaking. I sat in that bright, too-lit store and tried to think clearly. I texted the group chat again, but this time, I was not joking. I told them it was getting weird, and I needed to know who was doing it. I got the same answers. No one admitted to anything. I started going through my friends one by one individually. One was with his girlfriend at her place. Another sent me a photo from his basement, clearly not in a car anywhere near my station. A third was at someone else's house, nearly 30 minutes away from me. The timeline did not add up. None of them could have been doing this. That was the first time I felt actual fear instead of irritation. The calls started coming faster after 11. The fifth call came, then another after that. I stopped picking up. I would just stand there and watch the phone ring and wait for it to stop. A minute would pass, then 2, and then it would start again. This went on for 15 minutes, maybe more. I had no way to trace the calls. The store phone was old and basic. All I could do was not answer and try to stay calm. I started watching the cameras. The station had a few mounted outside and a few inside. It was old footage, grainy and dark in the low light, full of blind spots. Behind the building, there was a small patch of woods. On one side, a dim alleyway where the trash dumpster sat. The road out front was nearly empty by this point. I kept cycling through the camera views, half expecting to see one of my friends crouched outside trying not to laugh. I did not see anyone. I saw nothing. Just dark pavement and darker trees and the still empty pumps. Then I started hearing sounds. First, it was small things that could be explained away. A tap somewhere on the exterior wall. The kind of sound a branch makes when wind catches it. Then there was something that sounded like a slow scrape along the side of the building, deliberate and steady. Then a crunch from the back, like someone stepping onto loose gravel. Not wind, not a branch. The sound of weight shifting on a surface. I tried to reason with myself. I texted the group chat one more time, no more joking. Just a photo of the empty store and the words, "This is not funny anymore. Stop." One of my friends actually called me on his regular number, and I told him everything that was happening. He sounded completely genuine when he said he was not involved. He told me to lock the door early if I felt I needed to. Part of me still resisted because locking up before midnight felt like giving in. Like admitting I was scared when maybe there was nothing to be scared of. I kept working, I kept watching. At 11:40, the door opened. The sound made me flinch even though I had been watching the door all night. I looked up and saw a man walking in, late 20s or maybe early 30s, average height, average build. Nothing remarkable about how he was dressed. No signs of anything wrong on the surface. His face was completely blank, not unfriendly exactly, but completely without expression. He did not say hello. He just walked in and began moving through the aisles. I tracked him on the cameras while keeping my face neutral. He moved slowly, too slowly for someone who came in with a purpose. He drifted from one aisle to the next, never picking anything up, never stopping to actually read a label or look at a product. More than once, I saw the upper half of his face appear above the shelving as he looked toward the register. Not the casual glance of a browsing customer. Something else. Something that felt like surveillance. I cataloged reasons for his behavior. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he was high. Maybe he was indecisive and harmless, and I was projecting everything I had already experienced that night onto a completely innocent stranger. But my body had already made up its mind. My stomach had gone heavy. My hands felt slightly unsteady. I kept ringing up things that needed no ringing up just to have something to do with my hands. After at least 8 or 9 minutes, he finally came to the counter. He put a single bag of chips down in front of me. That was it. One bag of chips. For almost 10 minutes of wandering, he still said nothing, and I said nothing back. I scanned the chips. I looked down at the register. Everything felt still for exactly 1 moment, like the pause before a sound you do not want to hear. And then I looked up, and he was staring directly into my eyes. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it was 2 full seconds. He held the stare without blinking, without any expression whatsoever, and then he looked back down, paid, and took the chips. He walked toward the door. I was almost breathing again when he reached it. His hand hit the door and he pushed it halfway open, and then he stopped. He did not turn his whole body. He just turned his head back toward me. His chin was slightly down, which meant his eyes had to angle up to look at me. And then he smiled. I cannot explain that smile to anyone without sounding like I am being dramatic for effect. It was not a normal smile. It was the smile of someone who was fully aware of exactly how they looked and was doing it deliberately. It was patient and knowing, and it communicated something I did not want to understand. Every hair on my entire body stood up at once. Then he stepped outside. And instead of walking toward a car, instead of walking toward any pump, he walked along the side of the building. And the whole time, through the glass, he kept his eyes on me. He kept that smile. He walked until the angle of the wall cut him from view. I sprinted to the monitor. I watched him round the corner of the building and move toward the side where the trees were. Then he hit a blind spot and disappeared. I watched the screen. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, a full minute. He never came back out on any camera. I locked the door. I did not care that it was not yet midnight. I sent messages to every person in my phone, my family, my friends. I told them there was a man outside and this was not a joke, and if I stopped responding, they should call someone. I rushed through closing tasks. I barely cleaned anything. I kept watching the monitors, expecting his face to appear somewhere, expecting him to step back into frame. He did not. When midnight finally came, I grabbed my things and turned off what needed to be turned off. I unlocked the front door, stepped outside, and immediately locked it again from the outside. That moment of fumbling with the key while standing in the dark outside the building was one of the most terrifying things I have ever experienced. I started moving toward my car, which was parked off to the side of the building. I was almost there. I had slowed down just slightly, just for half a second, when I heard footsteps. Not running. Somehow worse than running. A fast, rhythmic, deliberate slapping of shoes on pavement coming from the direction of the front corner of the building. I turned and I saw him. He was moving toward me and my car with purpose. No more slow wandering. No more stillness. Just movement, direct and fast. I threw myself into my car. I locked the door. I started the engine. I reversed so hard I nearly stalled out. I looked once in the mirror before I left the lot and saw him standing in the glare of my headlights, watching me go. He was not running after me. He was just watching. He stood there completely still with his face turned toward my car until the darkness swallowed him. I drove home sending voice messages to every person I could think of. I know what happened. I know what that was. My boss looked at the footage later and told me the man looked like a regular customer to him. He said maybe the phone calls had rattled me and I had connected things that were not actually connected. That response made me angrier than almost anything else about that entire night. I quit shortly after. I told him if that looked normal to him, he was welcome to work the closing shift himself. Even now, years removed from that night, I believe the person calling that phone and the person who walked into that store were the same man. I have no proof, but I know what I felt. And I know the difference between a coincidence and something deliberate. The second story I want to tell you belongs to a woman named Cadence. She worked the closing shift at a small, dim bar that sat just off a highway in the quieter part of her town. It was a local place, familiar faces, classic rock on the jukebox, decent tips for a slow night, the kind of bar that smells like spilled beer and decades of the same conversations. Cadence had learned to handle every type of customer the bar attracted, the overly friendly ones, the sad, quiet ones, the ones who had too much and needed a gentle redirect toward the door. She knew her environment. She was good at reading people. That mattered during weekends when the place filled up and the energy could shift in an instant. But during the week, she worked alone. No barback, just Cadence and whoever walked in. She clocked him the moment he stepped through the door. It was just past 1 in the morning on a Tuesday. He looked to be in his late 40s, but he carried it differently than most men his age in a place like this. He was dressed in a black turtleneck underneath a long black coat. Clean, well put together. An almost deliberate sophistication about him. The kind that does not announce itself loudly, but simply exists and makes everything around it look slightly underdressed by comparison. He moved through the door slowly, scanning the room before he chose where to sit. He had strikingly good posture. He pulled out a bar stool and settled onto it like the bar had been built specifically for him. When Cadence walked over, he looked at the bottles lined along the wall behind her and ordered top shelf without hesitating. No deliberation. He already knew what he wanted before he walked in. He asked her if she liked working there. Simple question. She gave him an honest answer and smiled and made some small talk about the job. He was easy to talk to. That was the thing. He did not give her any reason to be uncomfortable. He felt like someone's reliable father, approachable and steady. They talked for a while, and eventually he asked if she had ever thought about doing something bigger, something beyond the bar. A strange question, but not threatening. She gave him a polite, non-committal answer. He nodded slowly, and something crossed his face for just a moment that she could not quite name. Disappointment, maybe. As if her answer was not what he had hoped for. Then he asked what time she got off. Cadence had assumed the question was heading somewhere predictable, the way these conversations sometimes do when a man has had a drink and starts measuring his chances. She gave a vague reply and picked up a rag and started wiping down the counter. He did not push. He just smiled in a way that looked like he already had the answer to a question he had not asked yet. Then he set down a crisp $100 bill and walked out without another word. She filed it away as strange but harmless. Some people are just odd. She figured she would never see him again. She was wrong. He came back exactly 1 week later. This time he was not alone. He had a woman with him, mid-30s, dressed in a way that felt slightly off, trendy in the way of someone performing youth rather than actually having it. Everything about her felt constructed. Her smile came too fast and too wide. The way she leaned against the bar was calculated, the body language of someone who wants to seem casual because they are not. Before Cadence had even set down napkins in front of them, the woman spoke. Not a greeting, not a drink order, a compliment. She said Cadence was so pretty while reaching out and letting her fingers graze Cadence's arm, holding the touch just a beat too long. The man stayed silent the entire time. which struck Cadence as strange given how talkative he had been during his first visit. They ordered drinks, and then the questions started coming. The woman asked how long Cadence had worked there, how old she was, what her schedule looked like. Polite questions on the surface, but the rhythm of them was wrong. There was no genuine curiosity behind them. It felt like a checklist being worked through, boxes being ticked. At one point, the woman glanced sideways at the man, and something passed between them, a silent exchange that neither of them narrated. Then the woman turned back to Cadence and told her she ran an exclusive event club. She leaned in and lowered her voice slightly, as if she were sharing something confidential. She said she was always looking for young, fun people for private weekend events. She said the pay was $10,000 for a weekend. She said a bunch of girls just like Cadence already worked for them. Her smile never once wavered or slipped. Cadence laughed a little and said it sounded too good to be true. The woman insisted it was completely real. She kept circling back to the same words: fun, safe, exclusive. Then she said casually that Cadence should step outside with them for a few minutes so someone else could explain it better. Cadence's pulse jumped immediately. She stopped even pretending to go along with the conversation. She said she was good and kept her face still and her voice firm. No smile, no softening, just a clear, direct refusal. At that exact moment, a group of customers came loudly through the front door, breaking the charged silence. Something flickered across the woman's face, just for a fraction of a second. Her composed expression slipped slightly before she arranged it back into place. She looked at the man. They left without another word. Cadence told her boss and her co-workers what had happened. Her boss said he was only 15 minutes away if she ever needed him, and pointed to the security cameras as a deterrent. Beyond that, there was not much any of them could do. The two people had not technically broken any laws. Cadence pushed it to the edges of her mind and kept showing up for her shifts. But a few nights after closing, when she stepped out to her car, she noticed a vehicle parked across the street. Engine off, headlights dark, just sitting there. She told herself it was probably nothing. She walked to her car with her keys already in her hand. She pulled out of the lot and checked her mirrors, and the car behind her moved. It stayed far back, just distant enough to almost seem incidental. She turned. It turned. She tried a random side street. It followed. The cold clarity of what was happening settled over her like a weight. She knew. She did not let herself panic. She navigated deliberately to the nearest police station and pulled into the lot. The following car accelerated and disappeared. Nothing happened immediately after that, but Cadence knew it was not finished. She was right. It was a slow weeknight, barely anyone in the bar, past midnight. She was wiping down the counter and thinking about whether she could close a little early. The door opened. It was the woman. Just the woman this time, walking in alone, moving slowly toward the bar with her hands folded, and that same unnatural smile fixed to her face. Cadence immediately slipped out her phone and texted her boss without looking down, keeping her eyes on the woman the whole time. The woman sat down. She said she had come to check on Cadence. Her tone was pleasant and hollow and deeply wrong. Cadence told her they were closing and she needed to go. The woman made a small, exaggerated pout and asked for just one drink. Old-fashioned, just one. Please. Cadence made a decision. She would pour the drink. It would take just long enough for her boss to get there. She turned around to start the drink, and that was when she heard it. A soft, definitive click. The sound of a door pulling shut. She turned around and the woman was gone. The bar stool was empty. Cadence moved toward the front door and looked through the glass, and her stomach dropped. A black van sat idling directly outside, just sitting there in the dark with no lights on. She locked the front door. And then from the back of the building came the sound of metal rattling against metal. Someone was working the rear door, trying to get it open. Cadence grabbed the heaviest thing she could reach, a metal cocktail shaker, and held it in one hand while she dialed emergency services with the other. She knew there was no way help would arrive in time. She was mentally mapping her options, weighing the front door against the back, trying to figure out which risk was smaller when she saw headlights swinging into the parking lot. Her boss. She recognized his car. The sound at the back door stopped instantly. The van lurched forward and screamed out of the lot. When her boss came through the door, she held onto him and told him everything in a rush. He told her he had gotten a partial plate number on the van as it left. When the police arrived and reviewed the security footage, it was worse than either of them had imagined. Just before the woman had stepped out, the cameras had caught two figures crouching near the front entrance in the darkness, masked, waiting. There was another person at the rear door. 3 people outside. They had been trying to flush her toward the front. The plate her boss had recorded came back unregistered. No match in the system, no leads. The case has not moved since. Cadence still works at that bar. Her boss made sure she is never alone during a shift again. But she says she still cannot shake the question of how they knew she would be working by herself that night. It still does not make any sense to her. And on the bad nights, when her mind gets quiet enough to let the thoughts in, she thinks about what would have happened if fear had gotten the better of her and she had run out the front door instead of locking it. The third story moves us to another quiet stretch of highway, another gas station, another person working through the dark hours of early morning. This person worked overnight at a small convenience station off a highway that barely saw traffic once the sun went down. Most of the shift was shelf restocking, counter-wiping, and the occasional exchange with a trucker passing through on their way somewhere else. Ordinary work in an isolated place at an hour when ordinary people are asleep. It was just after 2:30 in the morning. The last trucker had been in maybe an hour before. The parking lot outside was completely empty. Just the pumps, just the road, just the thick wall of trees beyond the edge of the property. The neon sign above the entrance made its usual faint flicker, and there was a soft haze in the air that night, the kind of visible moisture that makes everything look slightly blurred at the edges. The workers stepped outside for a moment, rubbing their hands together against the cold, watching their breath appear and vanish in the chill. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that has weight to it. Just as they turned to go back inside, a movement caught the corner of their eye. There was a man standing behind one of the gas pumps. He had not been there before. The parking lot had been empty and they would have noticed him. But there he was now, wearing a dark red hoodie with the hood pulled up over his head, both hands buried deep in the front pocket. There was no car near him. He was not fueling up. He was not walking toward the store. He was standing partially turned in the direction of the entrance, and from where the worker stood it looked unmistakably like he was watching them. The worker went inside and kept the door in their peripheral vision. The man outside stayed where he was for a while, shifting slightly, turning in a small, repetitive circular motion like something with nowhere to go but unable to stop moving. Then he walked toward the door. Not slow and casual, but with the energy of someone who had finally made a decision after a long debate with themselves. He pushed inside. He walked directly to the counter and stopped in front of it. He did not say anything right away. He looked at the person behind the counter for a moment in a way that felt like measurement, like he was calculating something. Then he started talking. His delivery was rushed, slightly rehearsed, like someone reciting lines they had practiced but had not fully committed to memory. He said his car had broken down just before the pump entrance. He needed a jump start, or maybe just a little gas to get to the next town, or maybe just someone to help him check under the hood. The worker's first instinct was disbelief. The story was barely coherent. The man was not even working very hard to make it sound plausible. When the worker offered to call a tow truck, the man refused quickly, shaking his head, dismissing the idea before it could even land. No. He just needed some help. Just someone to come outside with him. Something was wrong. That much was obvious. But the worker started wondering whether they were being too harsh. Gas stations at that hour do attract unusual people. Someone could be genuinely having a terrible night and expressing it poorly. The worker asked where the car was, and the man gestured toward the monitor mounted on the wall behind the register. The worker turned to look at the screen, and there was indeed a car sitting beyond the entrance, exactly where he had described. For just a moment, the worker felt something loosen in their chest. Maybe the man really did need help. Maybe this was all completely real. And then it hit them all at once. They had been outside less than 15 minutes ago. They had looked at that stretch of road. There had been no car there, none at all. The worker looked back at the monitor more carefully this time, and near the rear bumper of the parked car, there was a shadow that was not quite shaped right, a slight shifting, a crouching figure, partially obscured, almost but not entirely hidden by the angle of the camera. Someone was waiting behind that car. The worker felt ice move through their entire body. They did not let it show. They kept their expression neutral. They said sure, they would help, but they needed to grab their phone from the back office first. They turned around slowly, deliberately, not hurrying enough to seem alarmed. They moved out of direct sight. The second they were behind the wall and out of the man's line of vision, they hit the emergency panic button mounted under the counter. The alarm tore through the building, loud and immediate, cutting through the silence like something physical. They expected the man to come at them. They braced for that. But what happened instead was somehow more unsettling than a physical reaction. The man's energy changed completely. The nervous shifting stopped. The rushed, manufactured urgency drained out of his posture. He went still, and then he smiled. Not a startled smile. Not the smile of someone caught doing something embarrassing. A slow, comfortable, knowing smile. The smile of someone who finds the situation genuinely amusing, who has all the time in the world, who is not afraid of an alarm. Then he turned and ran, and when the worker checked the monitors, they saw both men, the one from inside and the one who had been crouching behind the car outside, bolting together. Not toward the road, not toward a car, into the trees. The car they had used to try to lure someone outside sat in the lot with the engine off and the lights off and nobody inside. When the police arrived, the car was still there, but the men were long gone. No footprints, no trail, nothing to follow. One of the officers pointed out something that had not been noticed before. The front passenger side door was hanging open. There had been a third person in that car, someone no camera had ever captured. The police ran the plates and called the owner. The car had been reported stolen nearly a week earlier from a location over 100 miles away. Nobody had come forward to claim it. No missing persons reports connected to it. No other crimes in the database that matched the signatures of what had happened that night. Just an abandoned, stolen vehicle in an empty lot, and 3 men who disappeared into the woods as if they had never existed at all. The worker never took another night shift again. The final story takes place in a large retail store. The kind of store that never fully closes, that keeps its lights running and its shelves full through every hour of the night, while a skeleton crew moves quietly through the aisles. This worker handled the electronics section during the overnight shift. It was usually the quietest part of the store. Nobody comes rushing in at 2 in the morning looking for wireless speakers. Most of the customers at that hour were restless people with nowhere to be or long-haul drivers picking up supplies before getting back on the road. It was manageable. It was predictable. Until it was not. The first time this worker noticed the man, it did not register as alarming. He was just another figure drifting through the aisles, which happened. But after a few minutes of watching, something became clear. This man was not shopping. He was not even pretending to shop. He was not picking things up, not looking at price tags, not checking his phone for a list. He was just present, hovering in the adjacent aisle, appearing at the edge of shelving units. Always just close enough to be visible, but never close enough to interact. And every single time the worker glanced up, the man's attention was not on the merchandise. It was on the worker. The worker told themselves the obvious explanations. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he was indecisive. Maybe he was simply one of those people who walks through stores for the company of other human beings at odd hours because they have nowhere better to be. But the pattern did not change. He kept appearing, he kept watching, and he never once approached or spoke. The worker reached for their radio to let someone know and discovered that the batteries were dead. No communication. The worker began thinking about finding a manager in person, walking the length of the store if necessary, when a hand closed around their arm. They nearly screamed. But before any sound could come out, a woman's voice cut through, loud and warm and familiar in a way that made no sense. The woman said, "There you are," as if they were old friends who had just found each other after searching for hours. She launched immediately into chatter, something light and breezy, a story about a trip or an inside joke, filling all the space around her with noise. The worker was completely thrown. They had never seen this woman before in their life. She was a total stranger. But her grip on their arm was firm, and her smile was convincing. And before the worker could process any of it, the woman leaned in and dropped her voice to something low and serious. She said the man had been recording the worker. She said to follow her. Now. The worker turned their head slightly and looked back at the man. He had stopped pretending to be anywhere near the merchandise. He was standing in the open, watching directly. And when the worker saw that, when the cold certainty of it landed, something shut off in their brain. They stopped questioning the woman and just moved, let themselves be led. They clung to the existence of another human being who was aware of what was happening, who was helping. The woman kept up the pretense perfectly, rambling as they walked, sounding like a friend telling a story, keeping up the cover so naturally that anyone watching would have seen two people who knew each other well. They moved quickly through the store. The worker did not pay attention to the direction, only to the growing distance between themselves and the man. Eventually, the worker looked back, and the man was no longer following. They started to slow down. They told the woman they were fine now, and that they should probably find a manager. The woman kept walking and kept her grip on the worker's arm tight. The worker told her again, more directly this time. The woman said the man was still lurking somewhere. The worker pulled against her grip slightly and said there was no reason to keep going. They were in a store full of employees now. They were fine. They said this clearly and planted their feet. The woman did not let go. Something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, not in a way you could easily put into words, but the warmth moved just slightly, like a light flickering. She smiled and said just a little further, and actually tugged. The worker looked around them. They had moved past the main registers, past the self-checkout lanes, past all the areas of the store that saw any kind of regular foot traffic. Ahead was the warehouse section, low lit and nearly empty. Beyond that, the loading exit, the one that employees used for receiving shipments, the one without cameras, the one that opened directly into the dark of the parking lot with no lights overhead. She was walking them directly toward it. The worker yanked their arm free with everything they had and screamed. A single, full-throated scream toward the front of the store. The woman lost her grip for just long enough. The worker ran without looking back. As they ran, the woman called after them. She called for them to come back. She used their name, a name the worker had never given her, a name she should not have known. A co-worker was already moving toward the sound of the screaming. Security was called. By the time anyone went looking, both the woman and the man were gone. When the security team reviewed the surveillance footage, it confirmed what the worker had already begun to understand. The woman and the man had come in together. They had walked in through the same entrance, and from that point on, they had worked in deliberate coordination. The man stayed visible, keeping the worker focused on him, keeping their attention occupied. The woman positioned herself to make the move at exactly the right moment. The man's face was caught clearly in one of the frames. The woman's face appeared in none of them. In every single frame she appeared in, her face was turned just slightly away, just enough to avoid any clear identification, as if she had known exactly where every camera was and had planned her angles accordingly. The police classified it as a failed abduction attempt. The investigation is still open. The man's face from the footage should be identifiable. The woman remains unknown. What haunts the worker most is not the man with the camera. It is not even the woman with the well-practiced smile and the grip that would not release. What haunts them is the name. That woman knew their name. These two people had not wandered into a store and selected a random target of opportunity. They had come in knowing exactly who they were looking for. They had researched, they had planned, they had known the workers' schedule and their section and their name before they ever walked through those doors. This was not chance. Every second of it had been choreographed, and the only thing that stopped it from ending differently was a scream, a coincidental coworker, and a split second of hesitation in the woman's grip. This is what the night shift does. It isolates you. It puts you in a lit box inside a dark world and makes you visible to everything outside while you can barely see past your own reflection in the glass. It makes every sound something to interpret. It makes every stranger a question. It strips away the safety of numbers and daylight and replaces it with empty parking lots and security camera blind spots, and the feeling that something in the darkness has been watching you for much longer than you realized. The people in these stories are real. The nights they describe are real. None of them planned for any of it. None of them had any reason to expect that a regular shift would become the kind of memory that never fades, the kind you carry with you in the quiet places between sleeping and waking, in the dark of a parking lot, in the moment, just before you hear a sound you cannot immediately explain. They showed up to do their jobs, and they survived. Most of them. But survival is not the same as coming out the other side unchanged. They are still running the footage in their heads, still mapping the moments where it could have gone another way, still asking the questions that have no clean answers. And somewhere out there, in those gas stations and late-night stores and quiet dive bars off the highway, the night shift is still going. The lights are still too bright inside and too dark outside. The phone is still mounted to the wall. The door still opens. And not everyone who walks through it in the small hours of the morning is there to buy chips. Stay aware. Trust your body when it tells you something is wrong. And if you work the night shift, please, do not go outside alone.